Elon Musk sees a future where robots do all the work. So human work will become optional, he says. What might be the implications of all of that? Well, stay tuned because that's what we're discussing next. Hello, and welcome to the Chaplain's Corner After Hours, a place to discuss stories the mainstream media ignores that can actually impact our Christian walk and our spiritual journey. Chaplain Warren and Chaplain Nan are your hosts, and we're glad to have you with us. Hello, and welcome back to the Chaplain's Corner After Hours. It's good to be with you again, and Chaplain Nan, how are you doing?
I'm doing really well today. It seems like my voice is back, so thank you for asking.
Well, glad to have you here. So, in our last episode, we discussed the role of AI in rising levels of Christian persecution all around the globe. And we'll put a link to that episode in our program notes here. But today we want to continue our discussion about AI, but go in a much different direction, and possibly even a more long-term destructive direction than the persecution of Christians. Because back on November 19th of this year, there was a little-known conference in Washington, D.C. called the U.S.-Saudi Investment Forum. The U.S.-Saudi Investment Forum 2025 was held to bring together visionaries, leaders, and change makers shaping the future of global investment. Those are their words. AI was a major subject of investment at that conference. And during a discussion of the future of AI, Elon Musk made the prediction that in the future, robots will do most of the work, and for humans, work will become optional. Now, we have the video clip from the conference where he makes that prediction, and we'll go ahead and play that right now.
Where will things end up long term? I don't know what long term is. Maybe it's 10, 20 years, something like that. Maybe that's long term. My prediction is that work will be optional. Optional. So we'll take that. Yeah. I mean, it'll be like playing sports or a video game or something like that. If you want to work, in the same way, like you can go to the store and just buy some vegetables, or you could grow vegetables in your backyard. It's much harder to grow vegetables in your backyard, but some people still do it because they like growing vegetables. That will be what work is like, optional. It's kind of interesting. And my guess is, if you go out long enough, assuming there's a continued improvement in AI and robotics, which this seems likely, the money will stop being relevant at some point in the future. Currency becomes irrelevant. But AI and humanoid robots will actually eliminate poverty. And Tesla won't be the only one that makes them. I think Tesla will pioneer this, but there will be many other companies that make humanoid robots. But there's only basically one way to make everyone wealthy, and that is AI and robotics.
The key points he makes in the video are: robots will do the work will be optional for humans, money will stop being relevant, robots and AI will eliminate poverty, and robots and AI will make everyone wealthy. Now, no matter what you think about Elon Musk, those are some pretty impressive and overarching claims for AI and robotics. And it reminds me of an old saying that says, just because you can do a thing, should you? And I looked it up the other day, and apparently that saying comes from the original Jurassic Park movie, which, if you saw that movie, you understand the origin of that saying. But what he's basically describing is a kind of a utopia. And probably most of us know from history that utopian schemes have been pursued many times before, and almost always, well, actually always, with disastrous results. For example, the original Puritan colony in America tried to live a communal utopian lifestyle, and they nearly all perished in their first winter in America. So we're going to do a 3-part series of podcasts on this subject, and we'd like to look at this prediction which Elon made from 3 points of view. Number 1, what would be the economic implications of such a scheme? And number 2, what would be the moral, ethical implications of such a scheme as he described? And then number 3, what might be the religious, spiritual implications of such a scheme? And so for today's episode, we're going to talk about the potential economic implications of what Elon is predicting. And so we'll kind of look at these implications point by point and try to offer a judgment as to whether it's a positive implication or a negative implication, or whether it's just unclear as to which way a particular implication might go. And so to start off with a positive or a potentially positive implication, there's the likelihood that using robotics in manufacturing and in other activities might lead to absolutely massive gains in productivity. Just think about it. Robots can work 24/7. They don't need lunch breaks. They don't need bathroom breaks. They don't call in sick. They don't call in and say, I don't feel like working today. And so the implications for productivity might be positively amazing. And so the supply of goods could potentially outstrip the demand for goods. Now, on the negative side, if robots are doing all the work, then we might experience massive unemployment in manufacturing and in white-collar jobs. Another implication that seems to be a little unclear to us is that to prevent absolute economic collapse and widespread poverty, Elon Musk suggests that a financial safety net, which he calls universal high income, would be necessary to provide for everyone's living expenses. Another unclear implication of all this would be that in this so-called post-scarcity world, money might eventually lose its primary function as a means to control or allocate access to essentials like housing, health care, and food, which could be provided as guaranteed rights to people. And that subject of guaranteed rights can be a very slippery slope and lead to some dangerous outcomes like slavery. As an example, people have talked about many times that health care should be a human right. Well, when you make something a human right, then that means someone absolutely has to supply it. And you might think in terms, well, the government would supply health care as an absolute human right. Well, the government has no money. It has no resources. What it does is tax people to do things like that, like to supply health care. And when you tax people, what you're basically saying is, I legally have a right to your work, to your labor, to what you produce. And that's an economic definition of slavery. And so this gets more into moral ethical implications, which we'll talk about next time. But nonetheless, providing a universal high income is kind of a slippery slope implication for this scheme. Now, on the positive side, if we don't have to absolutely work to earn a living, then maybe work can shift from being an economic necessity to an optional activity which is pursued for things like personal fulfillment. You know, people, instead of working 9 to 5 or something like that, they could do something optional like podcasting, for example. Another implication that might be viewed on the negative side is on a societal level. Think about society as a whole. The loss of traditional employment, which often ties into a person's personal identity and purpose, would require some kind of significant cultural and psychological adjustment for individuals so that as they seek to find some meaning for life beyond a job or a profession. And then finally, to kind of end this discussion up, we'll end with a positive or potentially positive implication, which says that while many jobs would disappear, undoubtedly new jobs or roles would emerge. And these jobs or roles might be focused on areas least threatened by AI, such as AI supervision, ethics management, emotional and mental health support, the creative professions, and of course, what we tend to call the blue-collar professions, the people who come and repair things, build things, maintain things that robots might not necessarily be good at. So some of these implications, if you really think about it, sound somewhat frightening, like the loss of manufacturing and white-collar jobs. But beyond the specific individual implications, I personally think that the real fly in the ointment of all of this is going to be the process of transition from where we are today and to where we might be going in that AI-driven future that Elon sees. And here's why I say that. Consider the relatively recent simple transition from internal combustion cars to electric vehicles. The utopian idea was that EVs are better for the planet than internal combustion cars. But instead of allowing a kind of organic type of transition to take place, where each individual person decides for themselves, do I want the internal combustion car or do I prefer the EV? Instead of that kind of individual transition, this whole transition was tyrannically forced on people and shoved down their throats. Along with that, the realized benefits of the transition fell very, very far short of the happy-clappy claims made in the beginning. And so the end result is that the transition crashed and burned, which is good because it was leading us towards probably some kind of class warfare. And so the notion that the supply of goods will totally outstrip demand sounds foolish, especially if raw materials and energy constraints don't derail that process. And so economically, when supply vastly exceeds demand, we know that price falls. And if you have an infinite supply of free goods, then you're going to have an infinite demand for those goods, which will likely cause prices then to go up. And so, and in addition to that, free everything might drive population growth. And could that possibly become unsustainable? So these are the kinds of economic questions that have come to mind as we've thought about this. Some of these questions, like the type of transition, the population growth issues, the massive unemployment can lead us into some kind of moral and ethical dilemmas, and those are the things we'll talk about in our next episode. One thing to maybe recall is that history demonstrates that the world population can make significant adjustments to how we live if the transition process is organic. That is, every person gets to make their own decision, and if there is some value in that transition. And so, as we consider, a transition like, say, from the horse and buggy to the automobile, by and large, that transition was organic. Individual people made the decision to go from the horse and buggy to the automobile as they perceived what the value of the automobile was. And the transition over a fairly short period of time, 50, 60 years or so, actually went pretty smoothly. And it was sustainable. So a much different outcome probably would have happened if it had been a top-down, forced down people's throat type of transition. So a key topic for discussion in the economic arena is, how will people discern the value in this type of transition, and will they be allowed to make their own choices as we go through the transition process? And do you have any comments, Chaplain Nan, on any of this?
I do.
Okay.
I actually have, so you used the word, you made so many big points. I guess for our listeners, for some of us, we understand what the terms mean, but for some, they may not. So you refer to a utopian idea a lot. So could you give what your definition is of utopian idea or utopia, both things?
Well, that's a good question. Utopia, in a general sense, refers to a place where everything is good and happy and fulfilling, and there's no negative outcomes, there's no evil, say. Everyone has everything they want, everyone's perfectly fulfilled, and no one suffers in that type of a situation. And we know from real life that just doesn't exist.
So in the history of mankind, there's never been a utopia?
No. Well, for a brief instant when Adam and Eve were in the garden before the serpent showed up.
Okay, so that was before reality. No, I mean in a history as we know it, there's never been such a thing as utopia. There've been attempts, and I mentioned like the Puritan colonies in America. There've been attempts at that type of thing. There've been, people who've gone off and tried to form a city, out in the... Like communes?
Yeah, communes. Yeah, thank you. And with a set of rules that everybody shares everything and all that kind of stuff. And it never lasts because I guess our fallen nature inevitably leads to the downfall of that type of an attempt.
Okay, so if there's no actual real thing as utopia, there's not something that happened before or a place that was that way. So it's just a theory.
It's a theory, a dream.
Okay, so my next question is, why is it that you think that for the history of mankind, it seems like we keep trying to make this thing happen? Is it because we have... Well, I have a theory, but I'm curious as to why do we keep trying to, why do we get this bright idea that it's going to all of a sudden finally be all excellent, and we actually know it's not, and there's nothing to prove that it would be? Why is it that we endeavor to to have, like, what is it about us that makes us keep trying to make this perfect world?
Well, I'm not sure that I really have a good answer for that, other than the fact that people at various times maybe get discouraged or upset with what they perceive to be inequalities in life, and they think they have an idea for solving those inequality problems, and depending on their place in life and their access to authority, they oftentimes go to extremes to implement those ideas, to the point of using the police power of the state to enforce their utopian ideas if they have to.
So if they know that it's not a real thing, there's nothing ever that it is a real thing, would you say it's sort of a innate desire in us to have such a place?
Well, I think probably most people would wish maybe there was less suffering in the world and more fulfilling outcomes for people, so that, some people, think that, gosh, it'd be nice not to have to work for a living. It'd be nice not to have to pay for health care. It'd be nice to have all the money I need in order to get all the things I want. I mean, those are kinds of utopian ideas, and so people come to believe that their ideas will work, and like I say, depending on their place in life and their authority, they may use everything up to and including the police power of the state to force people to accept their view of things. And I think the transition, the attempted transition from the internal combustion engine to the electric vehicle is a perfect example of that. There are a large number of people who truly believe the internal combustion engine is contributing to the demise of our planet and our demise, and that without really understanding the electric vehicle, have come to believe that that is a, quote, greener, unquote, option for transportation than the internal combustion engine. Okay, they're certainly free to have that opinion and all that. Nothing wrong with that. But here in America, as well as in Europe, those issues rose to the point where literally, the police power of the state was put into action to implement those ideas. In our country, regulations were put in place, not legislation, but administrative regulations were put into place to literally outlaw the internal combustion engine, so that the only option you would have for an automobile would be an electric vehicle. And you were not going to have any choice. Well, you would have a choice. You could not own a vehicle, but that would be your choice. If you wanted a vehicle, it was going to be an electric vehicle, come hell or high water.
So my theory is that we have this innate, in the same way we have a desire, we breathe, we eat, we have bodily instincts, we also have spiritual instincts, we have a great desire to love and be loved. I mean, unless you have some seriously mental health thing that shuts you off, something's wrong with your brain mechanism where you're unable to feel empathy, you have a desire to love and be loved. So it's like an innate, it's like something we're created with, I would suggest. And so it seems to me that, as a remedial student of history, didn't do too well in history class, but it seems there was always the attempt to create something that was called utopia, where everything was going to be all wonderful. and it never worked out, but we still keep driving. We still have that itch to satisfy that. And I think that's the itch for heaven. I think we have that so that if you're of a Christian perspective or even maybe in other religions, you have that itch is going to be satisfied in another like afterlife, but that we have that knowledge, we have that inner knowledge, or so that it makes sense to us that there's this thing where everything's going to be just totally perfect and loving and, like you said, no suffering. So back to Earth in real time, it seems as though every time there's been something called a utopian idea, just what you said, because it's unworkable without man being free. I think the key to the horse and buggy example and cars is that Americans were free. We were free to pick what we were going to buy. We were free. We weren't mandated. We weren't forced. I'm sure there was big bucks people trying to push things, but man was free to purchase the vehicle or not, or to keep his horse and buggy or whatever. He was free. And I think the key is the freedom part. What it seems to me is that every time the utopian idea gets into trouble, where it's put under threat of maybe not working out, is when man is free. And then the purveyor of the utopian theory, idea, project, if you will, purports that because humans are so stupid, we can't really decide for ourselves to buy the EV car. So because we're stupid or dumb or we're uninformed, we're not as, well,
not as enlightened.
The current term is the elite. We're not of that higher up, higher making brain power, because of that sort of mentality that comes upon people when their utopian idea is put under threat. Then they decide that the rest of mankind is too dumb to decide for themselves, as in being free people. And you mentioned about slavery. So it has to be removed from them. They can't be given that choice because they will always choose the bad for us choice. And then the only way that we currently know to implement such a forced utopian idea is through the power of the government, as we know governments today. So I'm just sort of having a big philosophical discussion here. Sorry, guys. But it just seems like as though history shows us that there is no such thing really in the earthly human life. And because of that, we keep aspiring, which actually is a good thing. We want things to be better. But the forced part is the bad part. But it always comes into play when it's at threat, when man's freedom, people say, well, maybe not so much. And to me, that was the whole idea behind communism. It was a utopian idea during some very, very terrible times as an alternative way which subverted man as being human and made him more an object to be used for the collective good. If anybody watches Star Trek, the Borg. So anyhow, I just bring it up because I just saw a YouTube of a young woman who was raised to be a pawn in the communist universe to be used. And she was raised to think that her body, her physical human body, was not her property, which is for Americans in particular, it won't even make sense to us, but that her body did not belong to her. And because there's no God, it didn't belong to God. Her body belonged to the state or the government or the entity called the government, the state. And so she had no control over her body. It belonged to them and they could do what they wanted to do with it. And because communism denies the reality of God, then she doesn't have a soul. So she grew up not thinking that she had a soul, like that she had a right to it, that she had a right to her own identity, nothing. So her body, her physical body, was like a robot's body, how we're talking right now, what robots will do, that's how her body was treated as a human being. It did not belong to her, and so she never felt bad about it because she thought it wasn't her, so she couldn't complain about it. In her own mind, she couldn't be upset about it. Her soul did not exist, so those yearnings that she might have had, she had to just discard them because they weren't real. There was no such thing as a soul. And feelings, how you feel about things, well, that was to be completely subsumed because everything was for the state, for the good of the collective. And that, I see, is a utopia that didn't work. There was a big revolution in the 80s about it. There was a big collapse of it. And now it seems to be thinking it presents itself again here in a different manner under the guise of another wonderful utopia here in the country, using the very things you're talking about, which is robots and AI, in place of free humans.
Right.
To be continued.
Well, yeah. So, but no, that's the whole issue. You know, it's one thing to replace human labor with robot labor, particularly maybe in dangerous occupations, but to tell people basically you can't work or work is optional and no one will value your work if you choose to do any, maybe other than yourself, you know, those are big changes. And so, you know, you have to question, all right, if we're going to go down that path, and we are to some extent, AI is not something that's going to be put back into the bottle. We're going to go down that path to some extent. You know, will we do it as free people, or will it be shoved down our throats like the electric vehicles were? And, you know, that lesson, I think, is worth remembering because I think it says a lot about, one, if they have to force it on you, it must not be that good. And two, if it's not that good, then why should we go there? And so that issue is where we'll leave things today and where we'll pick up in our next episode. And so until next time, thanks for being here with us today. And until next time, be blessed. Thank you for being with us today. Just remember, God is in control, and we know how the story ends.